I just can't afford them, ma'am. I'm sorry. The words, delivered by the young, harried bakery clerk named Cale, were a dull, familiar hammer blow to Ilara's soul. They didn't feel malicious, simply factual, a cold decree from the brutal economy of the Shadowkin realm of Ethel. Her hands, calloused from scrubbing floors in the Dajagir Manor house, clenched around the worn, nearly empty coin purse. Outside, the first whispers of the winter solstice snowfall were drifting down, turning the cobblestone streets into a festive, deceptive landscape. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and powdered sugar, the very scent of the joy she couldn't give, was an exquisite torture. Marigold, her daughter, only 5 years old, with eyes the precise, unsettling green of new spring growth in the ethereal plain, tugged on Ilara's frayed cloak. "Mommy! Are they the ones? The starlight moons?" Marigold whispered, pointing a mittened finger at a small, perfectly arranged pyramid of cookies, delicate shortbread dusted with edible silver glitter, a seasonal tradition only the wealthy could truly afford. Ilara felt the heat rise to her cheeks, the shame a physical burning weight. This was her fault. She'd promised her daughter a proper solstice this year, a true celebration of light to combat the surrounding perpetual gloom of Ethel. She'd worked double shifts, skipped meals, all for this, and still, the difference between her meager savings and the price of the starlight moons was a chasm she couldn't cross. The empty space in the bag she carried, where the cookies should have been, felt like a vast, cold echo. The empty chair opposite her was a monument to her failure to connect, a perfect, agonizing metaphor for the lack she felt every single day of her life. Ilara looked down, willing the sudden sting of tears to retreat. She couldn't cry here, not in front of her daughter, not in front of the handful of well-dressed Dajagers and Shadowkin shopping with casual abundance. The high contrast irony of the moment was searing. Surrounded by such beauty, such abundance, her own lack was magnified to an impossible degree. Preston's cruelty was a beginning, not an end, she would realize later, but at this moment the memory of her late husband, who had left her with debts and a profound emotional wound, was just another crushing weight. Kyle cleared his throat, a sound of impatient finality. "Ma'am, I really need to finish the transaction. There's a queue." Ilara nodded mutely, her heart cracking a little more with the finality in his voice. She pulled Marigold gently away from the counter, the child's hopeful eyes shattering the last fragments of her composure. Her hands trembled, her eyes burned. "We'll find something else, sweet pea," Ilara managed, the lie tasting like ash. "Maybe a nice apple on the way home." But then a little girl, Astrid, one of a set of shadowling twins whose quiet, observant nature had earned them the local nickname, the Shadow. Oracles asked a question that would change 3 lives forever. Astrid, no older than Marigold, but with an ancient, knowing look in her deep, violet eyes, stepped forward, her sister Bronte, a perfect, silent mirror image, by her side. Astrid held a small, black velvet bag, the kind that only the highest echelon of Shadowkin used for transportable currency. She tilted her head, her gaze piercing Ilara's soul, reading the raw, desperate pain etched on her face. "Why is your mommy sad?" she asked Cale, her voice a quiet bell cutting through the bakery's cheerful clamor. Cale, momentarily startled by the sudden intervention, fumbled for an explanation. She doesn't have enough silver to buy those cookies for her daughter, little one." "It happens." Astrid turned her focus to Ilara, an unsettlingly mature expression on her small face. "Maybe the weak man didn't come so you could meet us instead," she declared, her phrasing baffling and profound all at once. Ilara frowned, confused by the child's bizarre pronouncement. Was the weak man Preston or Cale? She didn't have time to process the mystery because Astrid, ignoring Cale entirely, looked past Ilara, her gaze fixed on something or someone behind them. "Daddy," Astrid said, her tone shifting instantly from profound oracle to simple, delighted child. "Can we join them?" Damon Ashworth, the man who stepped forward, was not merely a Dayjager. He was the Dayjager, the vampire king, Lord of Ethel, a name whispered in both reverence and terror across the ethereal plane. He was a force of nature wrapped in the impeccably tailored charcoal gray velvet of a solstice cloak, its collar lined with the rare white fur of a Lumina wolf. His silver-streaked hair fell just so, framing a face that was both austere and devastatingly beautiful, etched with the lines of centuries of responsibility and solitude. Damon was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be presiding over the High Council's annual budgetary review, a task he loathed but upheld with grim duty. His presence in a commoner's bakery was a statistical anomaly, a quirk of fate dictated only by his two determined, demanding shadowling daughters, Astrid and Bronte, who had insisted on personally selecting the flour for their home-baked cookies, a small, treasured tradition of their own. Every disappointment had led her here. He stood 6'5", casting a physical shadow that instantly quieted the surrounding shoppers. The air around him seemed to thin, pulling focus. Damon had been observing the small drama unfold, the quiet despair of the mother, the heartbreaking longing of the child, the flustered inadequacy of the clerk. The entire scene was a microcosm of the systemic failures he fought every day to correct in his realm. And then Astrid had spoken, her rhetorical question a direct challenge to his calculated indifference. He stepped beside Ilara, the sheer proximity of his power and presence causing her to involuntarily draw in a sharp, dizzying breath. The scent of spiced mead and something else, something ancient and wild, like a moonlit forest after rain, enveloped her. Damon placed a large, cool, shockingly so, but steady and firm grip on the small of Astrid's back, a simple gesture of fatherly possession. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, resonant baritone, a sound built for commanding legions, but currently aimed at a terrified bakery clerk. "Cale," he said, using the clerk's name with an intimacy that belied the vast social distance, "prepare 2 full pyramids of the Starlight Moons, double the order, and add a dozen of the Winterberry tarts." Kyle looked as though he might faint, his face losing all color. "Your Grace, for her," he stammered, gesturing awkwardly towards Ilara, who was now utterly paralyzed. Damon didn't take his eyes off the young woman. He looked at her, not with pity, but with a profound, almost clinical observation. He saw the resilience fighting through the pain, the tight, dignified set of her jaw, the way she instinctively shielded her daughter even in her shock. Maybe they were supposed to cross tonight. "Yes, for her," Damon confirmed, his eyes finally shifting to Ilara, a pair of ancient, molten gold pools. "And for my daughters. We will share a table, if of course the lady will permit us the honor." The question, polite and formal, contained an undertone of undeniable authority. Ilara could only nod, her tongue glued to the roof of her mouth. This was not merely a gesture of charity, it was an invitation to a deeply solitary, high-ranking being's private space. The high-stakes narrative had just pivoted dramatically. As Cale scrambled to pack the absurd amount of sweets, Damon guided Ilara and Marigold to a heavy, cool marble table tucked away in a quiet, shadowed corner, a spot clearly reserved for someone of his stature. The slow burn pacing of the previous rejection had evaporated, replaced by the fast-paced, dizzying reality of her new company. "Can we join you?" Astrid repeated, looking up at Ilara, her little hands already pushing an ornate yet simple wooden chair into place. The repetition of key phrases hammered home the turning point. The next hour was a blur of unexpected warmth, the kind of gentle, situational, and warm humor she hadn't experienced since Preston's death. The two Shadowling twins were a revelation, articulate, curious, and profoundly well-behaved, yet still utterly chaotic in their demands for specific cookie sections. Marigold, initially shy, blossomed under the attention. "The silver ones taste like wishes," she declared, which instantly brought a genuine heart-lifting smile to Damon's austere face. Damon, she discovered, was not the fearsome tyrant of the marketplace gossip. He was reserved, yes, but also deeply attentive and possessed a dry, self-deprecating wit. When Marigold accidentally tipped a glass of spiced cider onto his flawless velvet cloak, he simply laughed, a deep, rich sound that seemed to chase the perpetual gloom from the bakery. "A necessary purification ritual," he commented wryly, dabbing at the stain with a small, white napkin. "I'm professionally trained in vegetable negotiations, not cider management." Ilara found herself laughing too, a sound rusty and unfamiliar. The emotional short story was moving from heartbreak to something deeply sentimental. The conversation was simple: the best ways to clean soot from a chimney, the proper fermentation time for winter mead, Astrid's insistence that her father needed a new, brighter color of cloak. Ilara, focused on the moment, forgot her meager means, her crushing debt, her dead-end job. She saw only the man, the father, across the table, his gold eyes watching her with an intensity that made her entire body buzz. The internal monologue that accompanied this hour was a continuous, frantic background rhythm to the easy, simple dialogue. "He is the king. I am a washerwoman. This is an elaborate courtesy, nothing more. A moment of pity." Yet, when his hand brushed hers reaching for a tart, the shock was electric, grounding the fantasy elements in a potent, undeniable physical connection. The high contrast irony of the scene was stunning. The most powerful man in Ethel sharing cookies with the woman who couldn't afford them. The sensory description of his touch, the coolness, the surprising firmness, was etched into her memory. The emotional tone was shifting from tense to hopeful, a fragile, new possibility flickering in the shadows. Damon, in turn, found himself utterly captivated. Ilara was not flirtatious or demanding. She was simply real, her emotions worn visibly but proudly. He saw the genuine, fierce love for her daughter, the quiet dignity of her struggle, and a spirit that, despite everything, was still fundamentally light. Ethel, his realm, needed light. The light and shadows motif was playing out in real time on the marble table between them. But the moment had to end. Damon stood up, the movement an instant return to his regal bearing, the velvet cloak shifting with quiet power. The Shadowling twins gathered their leftover cookies with the efficiency of experienced travelers. Astrid, however, was not finished with her role as the child oracle. As Damon reached into his black velvet pouch, pulling out a handful of gleaming, heavy silver, and placed it on the table to pay Kael, she tugged on his hand. She looked directly at Ilara, the violet eyes unnervingly steady. "Daddy," she stated, "she needs a better light to clean the castle floors, and a safer room for the little one." It was the reveal, disguised as a child's direct observation. Ilara's face flushed crimson. She didn't want charity. She wanted a job she could handle, a way to pay for her life. "Your Grace," she began, finding her voice finally. "I can't accept this. The cookies were—" Damon cut her off with a look of stern, but strangely kind, finality. "Ilara Selwyn," he said, using her full name, a sound that resonated with unexpected familiarity. "The silver solstice moons are a gift. The job and the room are a necessity. I need a new head of domestic affairs at Ashworth Manor. I need someone honest, diligent, and real enough to remind me what I am fighting for." The words were an inspirational, motivational statement disguised as a job offer. He didn't offer her the old cleaning job. He offered her command. The sheer audacity of the elevation took her breath away. Every disappointment had led her here, the thought repeated, finally making sense. The resolution began in that silent moment. Damon's expression softened, the austere lines of his face easing into something almost tender. The rooms are large, the nursery is warm, and the pay is commensurate with the title. Astrid and Bronte need a strong, steady hand to guide them. And he paused, his gaze dropping to her mouth, then quickly back to her eyes. I need a reason to remember the scent of spiced mead and the sound of honest laughter. The rhetorical language was thick, poetic, hinting at a future far beyond employment. He wasn't talking about work, he was talking about purpose. Elara felt a surge of adrenaline, a profound sense of destiny. Maybe they were supposed to cross tonight. She wasn't accepting a handout. She was accepting a destiny. She looked at Marigold, who was already holding Astrid's hand, the two of them a perfect vision of childhood connection. She looked at Damon, whose intense gold eyes held centuries of loneliness and a flicker of the hope she herself had just rediscovered. Your Grace, she said, her voice steady and true, echoing the uplifting emotional tone. I accept the position. Damon smiled then, a full, utterly disarming smile that changed the geometry of his face, making him look less like a distant king and more like the deeply wounded, solitary male lead she instinctively knew him to be. He offered her his hand, his touch cool, shockingly so, but steady and firm. Elara placed her calloused hand in his, a washerwoman's hand in a king's, a gesture that spanned centuries and social strata. The destiny-fated love trope was sealed with a simple touch. The music cue would swell dramatically here, piano and cello rising to a powerful crescendo, then softening to an intimate score. The worst moment becomes the best moment, she realized, the high contrast irony of the whole event finally settling into a peaceful certainty. They walked out of the bakery, a most unusual tableau, the vampire king, the Shadowling twins, the washerwoman, and her daughter, all united by a single box of forbidden starlight moons. Can we have a party at the castle tomorrow, Daddy? Bronte asked, her voice quiet but decisive, looking back at the bakery that had served as the stage for their life-altering intervention. Only if the new head of domestic affairs agrees, Damon replied, his eyes on Elara. We'll need to discuss the solstice menu, Elara said, the word we feeling impossibly perfect on her tongue. It was a promise of a future, a home, and a connection she had never dared to dream of. The script would end abruptly, the camera focused on the four figures disappearing into the first whisper of the winter solstice snow. The dramatic fantasy romance fully launched, leaving the viewer with the deep, sentimental satisfaction of a broken heart mended by the hand of fate.